Well, we can go ahead and get started. It looks like we have a handful of people joining us, which is great. Love it. I love seeing everybody in the comments in the chat to show us where you are and where you're coming from, what organization you're with. So if you joined on then or a little bit later, just go ahead and tell us again who you are, where you're from. Brian from Kansas. We just have people from everywhere. I'm loving seeing.
Me too.
All across the country. So
I love it.
If you were here last week, welcome back. We had so much good feedback on the presentation last week and how great Amanda was. I mean, we had comments pouring in about how much they loved it. So not set the bar too high.
I know.
We gotta live up to it because it was great. But you're gonna be awesome because you are awesome.
Oh dear.
So excited to see what she has in store today for part 2. And this is not the last that we get to see her. We have another part 3 next week, which we'll be just as excited for. So register for that too. Even if you can't make them, register. We can send you a recording. No big deal. Yep, if you don't know who I am, my name is Courtney Luce. I work with Donate, who is helping host these presentations. We are an engagement platform for nonprofits to engage with their donors and supporters and do a lot more than that. Just don't want to spend 2 hours on the spiel. So I will be sending links and stuff if you want to get to know us or schedule any demos or anything with us. I'm happy to share that. And Amanda, who I've only met virtually and has just been, I mean, Steve even said last time, Steve is our founder of Donate, that we acted like we were best friends on video and we've never even met in person. She's just that kind of person who is great and energetic and has so much good, I was gonna say energy again, but it's an energetic energy that brings everybody here. So again, excited, I'll stop talking and doing all this, but she has a ton of nonprofit experience, over 10 years in the space, and now works for Evergreen Results, which is a marketing agency. She is in Colorado. I'm assuming they do work, across the country, but yep, if you're interested in that too, I'm sure she'll be following up with more information about Evergreen Results and you being able to utilize her expertise in even more ways. So Amanda, without further ado, I will let you jump right in.
So I might need to, hold on, I'm gonna remember how to do this.
You got it.
Did I get it? Okay, perfect.
It's up on the screen.
Then let me, sorry. That way I have some notes. Okay, good morning. So last week we talked about, my hair is very distracting this morning. Last week we talked about leadership and how to lead in crisis. And this week, as an appropriate follow-up to that, we're gonna talk about ways to cultivate relationships with stakeholders. The key word here is remotely, since we're all remote. We're in a crisis. This is what we talked about last week, but we still need to connect with our champions. We cannot be silent. So the first thing we need to do is we need to identify who are our stakeholders. So across the gamut, whether you're a church or a therapeutic writing center or a hospital or a university, regardless of the type of business or nonprofit that you are, stakeholders are our customers, our participants, our clients, our volunteers, our donors, our board members, our vendors, and our staff members. Our staff are also stakeholders. A stakeholder is truly anyone who has some investment into your organization. They have some connection, some tie. They have, in one way or another, they have made a conscious decision to support your organization in one way or another. So sometimes that's not always financial, but a lot of times it is. So a stakeholder is anyone who has any investment in your organization. I think that's really key because last week when we talked about leading in crisis, we talked a lot about our team and leading ourselves. And so I don't want to forget that staff members are also stakeholders, that they have a stake in the success. They are also champions of your organization. The other thing I want to remind everybody of is, as we get into this, like, this is all about like getting out of our comfort zones, thinking outside the box. And we talked about last week how crisis is often a cradle of innovation, and there's often opportunities that come about through crisis. So we want to be looking for them. We want to be aware of them when that opportunity comes up. So when we think about cultivating relationships with our stakeholders, we want to remember and keep top of mind to look for opportunities. What are we going to accomplish today? At the end of today, you're going to understand 8 guidelines and best practices for cultivating relationships. Again, this is kind of like last week. We want to lay the foundation, and then we want to make sure the root system is there, and then we're going to talk about actual ways and action steps that you can engage. So then you'll be able to identify at least 7 ways you can engage with your stakeholders remotely. And then lastly, I'm going to give you some tips and tools that you can use to put these things into action. And of course, there will be an application guide at the end, because just like when you're painting a room or painting your house, you know, the paint can't sit in the can. You have to take it out and put it on the wall. It's useless unless you apply it. Evergreen results, we're here to help purpose-driven organizations scale and sustain impact. That's who we are, and that's what we're passionate about doing. So cultivation best practices. Here's where I'm going to try to stay on time today, by the way, people. So if I am going too fast, you just make a comment and let me know. Here are some guidelines and best practices to keep in mind when you're cultivating relationships with stakeholders. Number 1, this idea that knowledge is power. Knowing your stakeholders is so key. And I don't just mean broadly. You know, the more I know my husband, the more power I have over him. No, just kidding. The more I know my husband, the better I can serve him. So the more we know our stakeholders, the better we can serve them. So that goes down to knowing, you know, the stakeholders that have given the most investment in time and talent and resources into your organization. You know, as leaders, you do not have, the reality is you personally do not have the physical and mental capacity to know every single, except maybe when you're, you know, starting out. But as you grow and get bigger, you physically don't have the capacity. So that load has to be spread across the board. However, it is your responsibility to know your stakeholders, number 1, from a broad perspective. And then number 2, you should definitely know the stakeholders who have given the most time, the most financial resources, the most investment into your organization. You should know them. Data is king and segmentation is queen. Data is our friend, even if we get frustrated by it, and it only helps us when it's accurate. But when it's accurate, it has no emotions, and it can truly help us understand our stakeholders better. And then when we have good data and we can segment that data, then we're able to serve and communicate with our stakeholders remotely in a much more effective and efficient way than when we're just broadly communicating. I'm going to talk more about that in a little bit, but that's why, you know, we believe data is king, because data gives you knowledge about your stakeholders. And then secondly, segmentation's queen, because once you're able to segment your data, then you can really target and personalize your cultivation efforts. And then the last point I want to make about knowledge is never forget. We talked about this last week. Never forget and engage in, and I implore you to engage in, the golden rule. So always put yourself in the shoes when you're thinking about, you know, what should I do? How should I communicate? Think about that, the golden rule. Treat others the way you would want to be treated. Put yourself in the shoes of that volunteer. If I were a volunteer and I had been volunteering with an organization for 3 years, 5 years, how would I feel right now if no one from the organization that I gave my time to every week reached out to see how I was doing? How would that make me feel? Would I feel forgotten? Would I feel lonely? How would it make me feel if I offered help, but there was nothing I could do? Put yourself in the shoes of those people who believe deeply in your mission and for years now have said, like, we all have limited time in our week. And for years they've said, I choose to donate my time and my money to this organization because I believe in it so much that in this time where they can't be as involved, if it's silent, how do they feel? So I think now with remote more than ever, that golden rule is really important. We talked a little bit about this last week, even with staff and leading your team. But when you have to do it remotely, communication is needed even more. Clarity and accountability is needed even more. So don't be silent. Commit to communicate and think about the golden rule when you do. Part of knowledge is power, and going back to know thy stakeholder is what I like to call LIA, and I can send, as a part of our follow-up, I will send everyone a free downloadable LIA worksheet that you could use with your donors if you choose, if you want to. It's totally up to you. But it's a worksheet that I've used in the past. LIA stands for linkage, interest, and ability. So it's the greater linkage someone has or connection someone has to the organization, the greater the interest they have in the organization, and then the greater the financial or time ability that they have to invest in the organization. The higher it is in each of those areas, then that is more likely going to be, at least for your leadership team, where you should really focus your time and invest a lot of your energy and efforts. Because again, what gets celebrated gets repeated. What's appreciated gets repeated. So you really want to invest in that. You don't have the time or capacity to invest in every single person. Should you be thanking every single person? Should you be trying to delegate cultivating relationships with every single person across your team? Absolutely. But as the leader, you have to focus your energy and your efforts on a specific champion group for your organization. And hopefully, we're going to talk about this a little bit later too, but delegating and engaging your whole team in this effort is how you can reach everyone. So the second thing to keep in mind is the power of story. This is something I really love. Sorry, Sally, LA, linkage, interest, and ability. And I'll send you a spreadsheet on that later, Sally. So the power of story. Story, whether we realize it or not, story runs throughout all of our lives and throughout all of our organizations. All of our organizations have a story that we're constantly telling. And one fallacy or myth that we have is, because we don't like conflict and struggle, none of us like, I would say most of us would say this current pandemic we don't want to be in. We don't like it. We don't like this struggle. But regardless of not liking it, it's conflict and struggle that makes a great story. Think of every single movie, every single great book you've ever read. If it's good, it has conflict. Without that conflict, it's not a good story. Additionally, without the resolution, and we talked about victory last week and defining that victory, without resolution, it's not a good story. So we're all telling a story right now through how we're responding and handling this pandemic with our organizations. And everyone on your team is a storyteller. That includes your volunteers and your board members. Everyone is helping to tell the story of your organization. So you want to think about what story is being told. You also want to remember that you should not be the hero of the story. You should be the guide. You should be like Yoda. Who are the heroes of your story? Your participants, your clients are the hero of your story. Maybe in some moments it's your volunteers because you're highlighting, their sacrifice, their commitment, their good work. And maybe sometimes the hero for a part of the story are your donors, your champions. But as a founder, an executive director, a staff member, you should not be framed as the hero of the story, meaning you should not be the main character. Like, we should be guiding people to understanding the impact the organization is making, the success our writers and our clients and our volunteers that they're having. It should not be about us. So the more we can use in our communications, in our cultivation efforts, you want to think about the more you can physically actually use the word you instead of I or me or we. Like, actually read through, if you prepare a letter or an update or a blog, read through that and look at how many times you say the actual word you versus I, we, or me. You want to use the word you as many times as possible and focus all of your attention and efforts and direction on the real heroes of the story. Branding and identity creates a consistent and memorable story. So even through, whether you're talking about branding and identity for your organization as a whole, or you're talking about branding and identity for how you're handling and responding to the situation. Shea Center is a therapeutic writing center out of California. I love what they've done. If anybody goes to their website, you will see on the front page, they have actually come up with a tagline for this time period and a hashtag, Stand with Shea. It's excellent. I think it's a great example of kind of branding this time, so that every time they send out communications or they post something on social or they create something, they can use this identity, and they're using it over and over, which is creating a consistent and memorable story for their stakeholders. It's an excellent example. And then lastly, don't forget about bringing hope, laughter, and joy into the story as well. Like, laughter is medicine right now. We all need it, and it's also something that stays with us. So, power of story. Think about story as you're cultivating relationships with stakeholders. Think about the story that is being told. Last week we talked about the fact that with Stockdale Paradox, you've got to communicate the brutal facts paired with that faith to prevail. So when you think about the story that's being told, you have to communicate and share the conflict and the struggle, but make your stakeholders the champions, the heroes of the story. Engage and delegate. So I don't know if anyone's ever heard about this phrase, culture of philanthropy, but I love it. It's basically talking about in your organizations, Building a culture of philanthropy means that everyone in your organization is involved in fundraising. It's not just up to one person. So when you create a culture of philanthropy, your team members, your board members, even your volunteers, they are engaged in fundraising and the success of your organization. So the way that you can do, and when you do this, you're also cultivating relationships. So the people who have given their time and their money to your organization already, who already believe in your organization, they want to see you succeed. And ideally, what you want to do is, if you think about it like a scale or a timeline, when someone first gets involved, they're first getting to know you, so their stake and in the engagement in your organization is lower. Everything on video is opposite. Can I just say, I have so much trouble with this. Their stake is lower. And what you want to do is you want to move them up on the scale. So you want to eventually, over time, you want them to have more and more ownership in your organization, meaning, and that's not a financial ownership for most of us. If you're a small business, it could be. But for the most part, for nonprofits, it's going to be that they feel some of the weight and they want you to succeed. They don't want your doors to close. If they come every week for, 3-5 years, they have given so much of their time to making sure, to serving and making sure your organization is able to continue and serve. They care. They deeply care. So the longer they're involved, the more that they give, they want to see you succeed. So the more you can cultivate and create that culture of philanthropy where people feel an ownership over the success or failure of the organization, the more sustainable your ability. You cannot bear all the weight of fundraising on either the development director or the ED. It will eventually implode because those people only have so much capacity. You have to be able to spread it out. The other thing I want to keep in mind is so that's about delegation, but engagement. Right now, don't assume that everyone is busy. So I love looking at, I think churches right now are a really great example. There are, because of virtual services and just the way a lot of churches are having to pivot to serve, there are staff members and volunteers of churches who are working harder and more than ever before to make that happen. And then there are some staff members who are working harder, but it's in a totally different way than they've ever had to do before, because they're used to being able to be with people every week, physically be with people, and now they can't, so they're having to pivot and figure it out. But then, there are some people who are not as busy as before. Maybe they've been furloughed. Maybe you just don't know. And we don't want to assume that our situation is what everyone's situation is. So when it comes to your stakeholders, don't assume that everyone is as busy as you are. And then that prevents you from reaching out and talking to them and asking questions and asking for their help. Don't make financial assumptions. Yes, a lot of businesses and a lot of people are struggling. That is the truth. There are also businesses that are thriving in this time more than ever before. So don't make assumptions about people's time, and don't make assumptions about financial situations. Talk to people. Ask them. Ask them. That is the best way to know, is just to ask them. How are you? How is your business? How are you doing? How is your family doing? That is the best way to know. Don't assume anything. Ask questions that are personalized and specific to that donor and stakeholder. And then also ask for their expertise or their help. Like, how would you handle this situation? What would you do? I know for me personally, the church that we are involved with here, several staff members, because of our business and how this has impacted our business, have reached out to me purely to say, like, how are you doing? And it brings me to tears thinking about it right now. Like, it was the phone calls we've received just to say, like, how are you doing? Make all the difference in the world. So that's exactly, I'm crying. Ugh. That's exactly how we should be treating our donors and our stakeholders. Okay, now we're gonna get into the fun stuff now. So 7 ways to cultivate, I'm gonna take a sip, relationships remotely. I also wanna say, I found this beautiful picture online, and I really wish it was my office, but it's not, but it's gorgeous. Look at that picture. All right, I broke this up into more like categories, and then I'm gonna give you specific examples in each one. The first one is virtual, and it's duh, because everyone here knows this, so I'm not gonna pretend like I'm sharing new information with you, because I know I'm not. Virtual meetings, they can be one-on-one and they can be in groups. Here's what I want to challenge you more in. I want to challenge you in virtual trainings. So for a lot of your organizations where you have volunteers, it may feel really uncomfortable to figure out a way to do like a volunteer training or a volunteer orientation online, and to provide that virtually. But again, we have to be able to get out of our comfort zones to come out of this thing on the other side better and stronger. And we have to realize that even if we're able to go back somewhat to normal, we're never going to be able to go back fully. So, or it's very likely we won't fully go back to the way things used to be. So we need to be able to be more comfortable with this. So virtual trainings, think about, instead of just stopping all training for volunteers, how can you keep it going virtually? Virtual book clubs. There's no reason that can't be virtual. Virtual happy hours and home cocktail parties. So we think about this with our friends, but have we thought about it with our stakeholders? So you could have, like, let's say you have a group of volunteers that are used to always being together. Why not pick a night or pick a day and say, hey, let's just have like a virtual happy hour together where we can catch up. Like that, for that group of volunteers who are always used to being together, if you help facilitate that, if you help cultivate that as, as a leadership team member, they will appreciate that and they will love the fact that you made that happen. Even if there's hesitation to participate in the beginning, like, I saw one organization do a virtual dance party with it's a small group. It wasn't like this huge dance party. It was truly like, and their kids were involved, which was really cool. They had their kids and families involved in this virtual dance party, and they like created this playlist for families, and everybody played it at the same time, and everybody had this dance party. It was so cool. And at first it's hesitation, like, oh, this could be awkward. But once you get into it and like the kids are dancing, like it was so much fun for them. And that is remembered, and it helped relationships to go deeper. They connected in a time where they're not able to connect in the same way. So really get creative, think outside of the box, use Google, use Pinterest. So when it comes to virtual opportunities, there's more than just the meetings, okay? There's more than meetings that we can do. Personalized videos. So what I mean here is you are able to create on different platforms, YouTube, Vimeo, even Google. You can create a personalized video where you can send it to a stakeholder and it's just for them. It can be private, it's not public, and it's just for them. So, you know, we did this several years ago, and they may still do it now, but like at Valentine's Day, we created for major donors just a quick, like a quick personalized video with someone's horse that they sponsored, just saying, thank you, we love you, you mean the world to us, something like that. And we sent it to, we made it really personal. Like we mentioned their name, you know, thank you, Karen. I just saw a comment, so I looked at you. Thank you, Karen. We love you. You can, in these personalized videos, you can provide specific updates, maybe that are specific to a donor or something that in your organization that you know they would care about. You can ask specific questions to them, again, to engage, to cultivate. But the main thing here is that you're letting them know that you're thinking about them, that you care about them, and you took time to connect with them and send a personalized video to them. You can include other stakeholders or assets in these videos. So, you know, maybe if it's okay from a confidentiality perspective, I want to make that clear. Maybe you use, you have a video from a participant. If a volunteer has worked with a participant every week for years, maybe they miss each other. Maybe you ask that participant to, can you record a quick video? You ask their parent, can you record a quick video on your phone that I could send to this volunteer? You know, again, this is private. This is not public. So this is very personalized and individualized. Maybe it's something, you know, a lot of you therapeutic riding centers, maybe it's with horses. It doesn't have to be just one person right now in front of a camera. There's lots of different ways where you can make this happen and pull in other people and things that might be meaningful, but again, meaningful to that person. Number 3, email campaigns. So what I want to make really clear here is we're not just talking about sending out emails all the time with asks. Okay. Again, we're talking about cultivating relationships. So we want to be really mindful about the golden rule, and we're not going to be pushing out information that is always an ask in everything we do. That's not what we're talking about. So these email campaigns, again, they should be segmented and targeted to different stakeholders. They should provide regular updates. Use pictures and videos as much as you can, because that's the kind of information in our day and age that is easier to digest than a lot of paragraphs and words and comments. Commit and be consistent. I think this is huge. If you say, and again, I'm gonna applaud the Shea Center in California here. They have done an amazing job of sending out a weekly newsletter communication to their stakeholders. And at the very beginning, when they first had the close, they said that they were going to do it in their newsletter. You can go to their website and you can see their newsletters. They said they were going to do it, and then they have actually done it every single week. And when you open and read their newsletters, it's a great example of using the word you, and they make their communication all about their stakeholders. It's not about them. It's all about their stakeholders. And then I want to go back a little bit to segment and target, different stakeholder groups. What you can do here is, let's say, as a church, you've got a group of volunteers in a specific area, Maybe it's the hospitality group. That's the first one that came to mind. You can target certain communications specifically to that group, and you can talk about updates and missing them that are only specific to that group. It wouldn't, what you say in that email would not necessarily resonate or apply across the board. For therapeutic writing centers, you know, an email to volunteers, you could talk about their service and their commitment and how much you miss them, and the language you use can be really specific to volunteers versus a broad language of missing everyone. And while both are going to mean something, what's going to mean more when you feel like someone's speaking directly to you versus broadly? The last thing I want to mention here is treat your subject line like a movie trailer. I see a lot of bad subject lines. Like, if you just have your subject line as monthly newsletter, that's a bad subject line. Treat it like a movie trailer. Give a teaser of what's inside. Your subject line matters at least as much as the content of the email. And why is that? Because that's what's going to get your email opened. So it's that subject line that makes a huge difference in order for people to actually want to open your email. And I love this quote by Seth Godin when it comes to email marketing and email campaigns. Why waste a sentence saying nothing? So many times we feel like we have to fill the space on a page or something, and we're either saying something like 3 times when we probably only need to say it once. We're saying it a lot longer than we needed to say it. Someone's attention and focus is only so long. A fact for a website, this is not about email campaigns, but this is just to showcase attention. If you have someone who goes to your website and stays on your website longer than 3 seconds, the chance is that someone will actually go to another page on your website or stay on your website are so much higher. That is how quickly someone makes a decision to continue to read something. So that is why it's super important that, number 1, your subject line is engaging, and number 2, what is in your email is worthwhile, meaningful, and engaging. So be really thoughtful and intentional about what you're putting in your email campaigns. Social media. I could go on about this one for a long time. There's a lot of back and forth about a lot of different practices and social media and doing this, doing that. So I tried to focus this on what I feel like for nonprofits and small businesses right now would be the most valuable ways to engage with stakeholders at the moment. Use the platforms where your stakeholders already are. Notice I did not say use the platforms you are comfortable and familiar with. That would not be serving your stakeholders well. If you are a B2B nonprofit or business and the majority of your stakeholders are on Twitter, but you're spending all your time on Facebook, you are wasting your time. You are not serving them well, and you are not meeting them where they are spending your time. If the majority of your stakeholders are using Instagram, but you're using Twitter because that's what you're comfortable with, you are not serving them well and you are not meeting them where they are. So use the platforms where your stakeholders already are. Don't feel like you have to use all of them. Focus your time and your energy and that learning curve on the areas that are really going to make the most difference and where they already are. Jab, 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 right hook rule. You could say hug, 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 kiss, or court, 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 date. Whatever you want to say that's nicer than jab, 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 right hook is up to you. But the premise and the rule here is that jab, jab, jab is the give, give, give. Don't make every single social media post and push and ask. This is a rule of thumb, regardless of a pandemic or a crisis. When I see a lot of nonprofits guilty of this, when we constantly push out and we always only post things that we need, we're only asking for donations, we're only trying to recruit volunteers, we're only trying to get, in-kind gifts. We never give value, we never provide a warm and fuzzy, we never provide knowledge or expertise, we never create engagement and connection, then we're missing out on our audience, and our audience won't grow because people get tired of that and they get tired of it really fast. So your right hook is your ask. Essentially, at least for every 3 gives, you have 1 ask. So create value, share impact at least 3 times more than your ask. And this can be an ask for anything. So this is recruiting volunteers. This is financial donations. It's any ask, any sort of ask. Seek engagement and connection over likes. It's really easy to measure like how you're doing with likes, but the reality is engagement and connection when it comes to social media is really where you find success versus the likes or the views. And again, in this time, that is what you are seeking anyways. You're trying to engage and connect with your stakeholders. So prepare for that. When you're preparing your social media, think about how can I engage and connect with stakeholders, ask questions, do polls. So here are some ideas for social media, and I've seen some really neat things happening. Take advantage of live streaming. It's so easy to do right now, and you can do it on multiple platforms. There's a lot of, again, I'm going to go over tools you can use later, but there's different platforms and tools you can use to help make this easy. But there's also, you could just do it straight from Facebook or straight from Instagram, and do live streaming of all different kinds of things. Interactive Q&A sessions. So you could do Q&A with experts in certain fields, or you could do Q&As with some of your stakeholders and your champions. Sprout Therapeutic Writing Center has done an amazing job. Brooke in Virginia is a sweet friend, and she is doing, I feel like I've seen her really lead the way in this area. And I talked to her about this. So I reached out to her to say, like, you're doing a really great job. Can you tell me a little bit about how this idea came to be? She has been doing interviews with different equine professionals in the field at least once a week and live streaming it. So like this past week, she interviewed the author of My Pony Club, the founder and author of My Pony Club. She said to me, she said, at the very beginning of this, I took time to think about like, what is our mission and how I need to pivot. And I realized that our mission is not actually about horses. It's about serving people and providing, hope and strength. And I can do that even if I can't provide lessons. So she had this revelation, this real moment of, oh man, again, when we talk about pivot, your vision stays the same, your strategy pivots. So she realized her mission vision stayed the same, but the way she was serving people changed. And it will likely be different forever. She will go back to lessons, but right now she's really engaging in creating content that provides value and still serves their mission. So There's a lot of different ways you can do this. Again, it's not just about the social media posts every now and then. It's also about, you know, ways where you engage and connect and talk with your stakeholders, and you can use social media to do that. Okay, I'll go on from social media because it's a big topic. Reimagine events. So we talked a little bit about this last week. Really think about and consider, does my event need to change? You know, if it's an event that is happening soon or even in the summer, you probably really need to consider if it needs to change. And then if it needs to change, really ask yourself, like, instead of just canceling it, can I make it virtual instead? Really challenge yourselves here, push yourselves to not make a decision out of discomfort and fear versus making a decision out of how can I best serve our stakeholders. Again, Sprout, I'm going to give them a shout out and a great example here. So they had a horse show and they pivoted and they changed it, and they're calling it the Quarantine Classic, which I think is an awesome name. It's a horseless horse show. You can go to their website and see what they have there and kind of how they're doing it. Shea Center for Easter, they held a virtual Easter carrot hunt, which I thought was an awesome idea for their clients who couldn't be a part of a regular Easter carrot hunt that they would do. So they made it virtual, which was awesome. And then fundraising events, galas, totally shifting to virtual. I've seen some organizations and examples where they still had their gala and they were actually able to arrange volunteers to safely deliver, safely is keyword, but safely deliver the meals to their guests at their house, so that not only was the event like moved to just online and virtual, but they still got the meal that they would have had for their event, and it was still delivered. So you can even take it a step further to say, like, tell your guests, hey, we would still love you to like dress up in your black tie affair, and maybe you have kids who are going to be with you now who weren't going to be with you, so let's get them involved in this, and maybe they can dress up. Maybe you need to add something in that virtual event for kids that you weren't going to have before. Again, think outside the box. You can reimagine events. You don't just have to immediately jump to canceling them. I've also seen a lot of organizations who had an event, and instead of where they canceled, but instead of having a virtual event, they shifted to a targeted email campaign, which over a course of like 5 to 7 emails, they raised the money they needed to raise that they would have raised at the event. So it doesn't even have to be shifting the event to a virtual event. It could be shifting the event to an email campaign. Engage in Goodwill activities. So these are things that may not have a direct financial return on investment, but they will have a return on investment eventually. They provide emotional, psychological, and social kindness and goodwill. And these goodwill activities can be for your stakeholders. They can also be good PR opportunities. Ask yourself the question, is there anything you can do to serve the most vulnerable and isolated groups in your community? I'll use our current church as an example. We were about to launch an outreach, and we decided to pivot and target the we were about to launch a foster care and adoption outreach, and we decided to pivot at this time. We pushed pause on the actual launch of that, and we said, we're going to create an initiative that is going to last 2 to 3 weeks in our community, and it's going to focus specifically on the most vulnerable, so the elderly, the homeless, foster care and adoption. And we came up with virtual ways for people to help and get involved, a virtual food drive, a virtual gift card donation for foster care families, etc. So we pivoted that and we made it about more than just foster care and adoption because of the current situation. But we asked ourselves, how can we best serve them right now? And that is not something that has like a direct financial return on investment. However, it is, it leaves an impression, like the way we serve people now. Again, this goes back to what we talked about last week. It's not just about how you're flying the plane right now, it's about how you're gonna land the plane. So what you do now makes a difference for how you successfully land, because what you do now is what gets remembered when this is over. Think about things that you can do that are going to be low cost, because you are most likely need to be very prudent with your resources, but that would have a high return. So Agape is doing something that I love. They're calling it their wish list. They have asked writers and participants, what's a wish that you have right now? And then they have a list of wishes from writers and participants, and they're trying to fulfill as many wishes as they can personally for writers. So that might be like, I would love to see my horse, you know, and they might do a video with their horse. Visiting, you know, a lot of you therapeutic writing centers, so I'm going to use this as an example, visiting nursing homes, you know, holding up notes to provide all of this safely, I want to say, to provide, you know, notes of encouragement and inspiration, or maybe you bring an animal that they can look out outside their window, printable or virtual activities for your families and clients to do at home or to do together, games that the whole family could do together. Again, think about, you know, what can you easily, that's not going to cost a lot of money, but it is going to provide a lot of social, emotional, and psychological well-being for your stakeholders. What are things that you can do? This one, I just can't emphasize this enough. Don't underestimate your grandma's ways. I will always be a fan of the traditional. Think of the power of a handwritten note anytime. Like whenever I get a handwritten note in the mail, I love it. But how much more does it mean if you get it right now? Either a note of encouragement or a note of appreciation, you know, just something that says like, I'm thinking of you. You know, I miss, like, for volunteers, if you're with volunteers every week, I miss being able to talk with you every week and share these jokes every week, or it just means a lot. It shows someone that you're thinking about them and that you care. Never underestimate the impact of a phone call, simply to ask, how are you? I'm thinking about you. These are the things that very easily in our day can go into the, oh, I'll hold that off till later. I don't have time to do that. But yet these are the things that make the most difference in the life of your stakeholder. So make these tasks a priority for your whole organization, because these will make a huge difference in the lives of your stakeholders. And your stakeholders are your champions. This could also be notes from participants or volunteers, as well as staff and board members. Okay, tips and tools you can use. And you're going to get a copy of this webinar at the end, so you'll have these, you'll get these later. You don't need to write them down right now. Tips for success. First one, optimize your website for giving. I can't stress it enough. You know, one tip I can give is the way we look at a computer at a website is in a Z pattern. Oh, I gotta do the opposite, Z pattern. And so we read from top left over to right, down and back. So you want to make sure that your the call to action that you want to be really clear right now or forgiving is most likely going to be in that somewhere in that top right hand corner, because you want it to be prime and central. Make it stand out from the normal toolbar, okay, or menu. Think about national holidays that are coming up with quarantine. So like Mother's Day is coming up. Maybe you can do something for the moms in your organization that's special for them, that more than just a social media post. Maybe not, but you don't want to miss out on this opportunity to do something different. And Volunteer Appreciation Week, like these are things that are kind of across the board. Maybe you can do something special. Test your technology first. We even tested this. Courtney and I tested this. You know, try to make sure you feel somewhat comfortable with it before you do it for the first time, especially. Think through purpose and design and then create accordingly. So you don't just want to be willy-nilly reacting like, oh, this sounds great, this sounds wonderful, let's do this, but you don't think through what is the purpose for this specific group of stakeholders, and then you design whatever it is you're going to do according to that purpose. So if your purpose is to speak to the volunteers in your organization and provide them with value during this time, then you're going to design something that speaks to that. Prepare for engagement at the beginning. I talked a little bit about this earlier. Think about ways to connect. So what questions can you ask? Can you do a poll? Can you do Q&A? Even with this webinar, Courtney and I talk about, we talk about what questions can we ask at the beginning? How can we really engage people in this conversation, even if I can't actually hear your voice? Prepare for technical difficulties. So even if they don't happen, being prepared for them in case they do happen is really important, because it could really happen. And then check out our free guide on, oh, I say that, but I haven't told you about it, sorry. We will be sending out later a guide on how to lead your team remotely. So it'll be really specific tips, and this is really, it's gonna be targeted to your team. Your team is working virtually, so this will be tips on how to do that. So check out the guide on how to lead your team remotely that we'll be sending out later. Okay, tools you can use. Donate is one of them. I'll come back to that one. Asana, there's project management tools here, task management tools. Mural is a virtual brainstorming tool. We have live streaming tools you can use, Canva. All of these tools are either free or low cost. So you're most likely not going to use all of them, but I hope that it gives you a lot of ideas on things you can use. Donate is not to be confused with the donor management system. It's donor engagement, so stakeholder engagement. And I'm going to invite Courtney to share a little bit more about that and Donate and what they can do if she can. Do I have to stop sharing for you, Courtney?
No, you're good.
No.
Can you see
Okay.
me? Hopefully everyone can see me. Hi, Courtney. Thanks for including Donate and tools you can use. So yeah, Donate is a lot in one platform to engage your supporters. So we, in groups like this, like to call us the match.com for supporters with organizations that they care about. So we do have a matching algorithm in place that we connect with supporters and companies too that we know already care about your cause, but also we have a lot of tools in place to engage with your current supporters. So having online fundraising campaigns, events, volunteer opportunities, sharing your wins and missions accomplished that with your supporters, sharing news updates, messaging, surveys, I mean, a lot in one. I used to be in fundraising for a nonprofit and wish that I had this just personally. So I got really excited when I met Steve, our founder, and learned about Donate and all that we can do for organizations. So I'm going to, just so that there's a quick call to action, I'm going to go ahead and share a action with you that you'll see requested demo. So if you are interested in learning more about Donate and just who we are and want to see the tech, request a demo. We'll be in touch.
Awesome. Okay, so questions. We'll take a minute or so. A minute. I'll give you more than a minute. We'll take a few minutes for questions, and then call it a wrap.
I also, sorry, I forgot, we have a 20% off. If you have been a part of any of these webinars, this 3-part series, it's Evergreen 20. I'll type it and send it to you after this. So we have a 20% off our stuff too. But yeah, now ask questions.
Thought I saw a question earlier at the top. Might have already been answered. Okay, good. Cool.
Yeah, feel free to take a little bit of time to process. I'm working on allowing your mics right now. So if you want to, you know, chime in and talk or just type your question, that's great too.
Oh, any ideas or suggestions to take a golf tournament virtual? That's a good question. So, you know, okay, so it kind of depends on my answer is going to depend on the other events that you do. How significant is this golf tournament? What is the normal return on investment for the golf tournament? So golf tournaments tend to be a lot of work. And depending on the amount typically raised, you know, you should ask the question, is it going to be better for our time and resources to, instead of doing the golf tournament, pour all of our time into this other fundraiser? Or you still do the golf tournament, but you have to pivot it and do something completely virtual. So it kind of depends on what your golf tournament normally involves. So for example, something that Agape just started last year was like a helicopter drop as a part of the golf tournament, which is essentially like a raffle contest for a cash prize, but you buy chances. Every golf ball is a chance, and then the helicopter drops the balls over the course. That can be done completely virtually. It's not the actual tournament. So there are probably aspects of the tournament you can do virtually. I don't know if there's an actual like game out there, like or app or software that's like a virtual golf game that you could do. That might be kind of cool. I haven't researched that, but that might be kind of neat if there is. But overall, Cheryl, I would say, like, really ask yourself and look, like, what is the return on investment for this golf tournament? Does it make more sense to scrap it and add that fundraising goal to something else, or maybe to an email campaign? You know, it kind of just depends. Leah, sometimes with a nonprofit or church, it's hard to change the culture that the staff isn't the hero. Yep. How do you recommend changing that so that the volunteers and partners are the heroes? I think it all starts with language. It's a paradigm shift in our language. And that takes intentionality. So number one, it starts with someone in leadership talking about, this is something, you know, we are here to serve. And that is our mission. That's why we exist. You know, so something I want us to be really intentional about is how we, with each other and internally and externally, how we frame who the main character is in the story that we're telling. So think about, I want to challenge you as a staff to think about when you are putting together a newsletter, how many times do you use the word you in that newsletter and frame that story, that hero of the story, as the members in our church versus ourselves. It is hard because it's a public speaking, public recognition environment. And so, but at the end of the day, it's really you wouldn't have a church without a congregation. If you only had staff, you wouldn't have a church. So I think it starts with our language, and it starts with being intentional when we prepare communications, reading those communications and thinking to yourself, who is the main character in this story? I hope that helps, Leah. Yeah, and celebrate and promote stakeholders more than the organization itself. Yes, that's huge. Tell their stories, not yours. Yep. Yep. I've been asking myself lately, is this just informing the reader or is it empowering the reader? Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep, that's a paradigm shift question. All good questions. I know it's really challenging right now, but I think that challenging ourselves can bring about growth and good results. So we always say, like, we will say we want to grow as an organization or even personally as professional development. But the reality is that growth literally cannot happen without change. Like, it's physically impossible. If you're not growing, then you're not changing. So you cannot grow without changing. So we have to be able to embrace changing our methods and learning new things, even though it can be really difficult. I think I mentioned last week, everybody needs to go and look up the SNL, the Saturday Night Live Zoom call video, because it's hilarious, and I think you all will enjoy the good laugh. Cynthia, if you're the only one that is really working on this material, since your team is not on board, what would you say would be your top 3 priorities? First question, Cynthia, when you say team is not on board, is that because they're furloughed, or do you mean not in support of? My priorities would be different depending on if it's because they're not in support of, or they're just not actually there right now because of the situation. As a leader, so it starts with you, and it starts by leading by example. So that goes back to last week's webinar, lead you first, lead by example, celebrate, what gets celebrated gets repeated. And I would say that for a team that doesn't feel motivated, trying to understand why they don't feel motivated would be one of the first priorities. So sometimes a team isn't motivated because they just don't understand the why, or they don't understand the brutal facts and the reality of it. So, asking yourself as first priority, as leadership, has our leadership team, so executive director and operations director, have we communicated transparently what is really the situation with our organization right now and the impact that COVID-19 has had? Have we made it really clear about that? And if not, then maybe the motivation is because they don't understand how serious it is. Or even outside of COVID-19, sometimes team members don't understand how important fundraising events are if they don't make the actual connection between fundraising events keep me in a job. So when we think about how we look at stewardship, if we don't realize that our donors keep us working, like that is how it's our livelihood. How much should we be appreciating them and stewarding them and cultivating those relationships, because that's what keeps us all here, being able to do this great work. So sometimes they need to understand that cultivating relationships is important, because we can't do what we do without it. Sometimes we need to be the leaders who connect the dots for our team members. Team members who are just there to collect a paycheck versus team members who feel like they're owners in this and they have a stake in this and they have responsibility in the success or failure of this organization. That's what you want them to be. You want team members to feel like owners, not just be there 8 to 5 collecting a paycheck. So I think first priority would be understanding that and communicating that, and it's kind of starting to change your culture. But this takes time. Like, this is not something that will change overnight. And it also takes intentionality. As leaders, you have to be really intentional all the time about communicating the culture that you want to be, and then leading by example in that culture. And then the next thing I would say when it comes to cultivating relationships is I would delegate and I would keep people accountable. So step 1 is communicate the why we are going to do this and why it's so important and poignant. Step 2 would be figure out ways to delegate and really engage them. So engage them in the conversation about thinking creatively. What can we do to serve our stakeholders, provide value? What ideas do you have? Empower them by bringing them into the conversation and decision-making process. And then step 3 would be actually delegate to your team members. When someone is given responsibility to do something, they then understand or feel like that it's more important than if you just talk about it, but then they don't have any responsibility in fulfilling it. So you do want to delegate to them. I will say that good rules of delegation will be that you, as someone proves that the more responsibility they can handle, you can increase the amount that you're delegating over time. But I certainly wouldn't say like, hey, let's delegate this really personalized phone call to a major donor of ours with a team member that they've never talked to. I wouldn't do that. Hopefully that helps. Cynthia, you're more than happy to email me later and I can talk with you more about that for sure. Sometimes it's not always like a black and white answer. I will, to be respectful of everyone's time, we'll wrap this up and say that next week we're going to talk about decision making, how to combat decision making fatigue in a time of crisis when there are lots of decisions coming your way. I gave you a lot of decisions to make today, so I have probably impacted your decision-making fatigue at the moment. So thank you so much for joining. I hope you can join us next week for the 3rd session, and we'll talk about decision-making. You guys are wonderful. You're doing really great work, and it's important. It really matters. So keep doing it even when it's hard.
Yes. I love it. Thank you so much for doing this again, Amanda. We really appreciate having you on board, not only for 1, but 3. And it's all been just such great content. So you'll be hearing from both of us with some different sort of recaps of the webinar, and then also with links to register for next week. So thank you all for participating and asking such good questions and joining us from around the country.
Yes, thank you, everybody. You're awesome.